He was chosen to begin with delegate for life in 1802, and to a long time afterward delegate himself Napoleon I, head of the French. He was to hold that title for 10 a long time, and amid most of that time, he and France ruled Europe. Inside France, Napoleon sought after the center course of registry, attempting to protect the major picks up of the insurgency, whereas maintaining a strategic distance from a return either to radicalism or to government. He weakened Agent Box 2.2 Charles Dickens on the guillotine. The quest and meaning of the French transformation are among the most fervently challenged things in all of history. It was, after all, a time of radiant accomplishments, but moreover of much enduring. In Britain, where political altar had come in generally tranquil ways, numerous individuals were horrified by the viciousness of the French insurgency. Charles Dickens, for case, who was born an era after the transformation, composes in the story of two cities that was a version of the adore the guillotine amid the fear. It was a national razor that shaved near. It was a sign of recovery of the human race. It superseded the cross. Models of it were worn on breasts from which the cross was disposed of, and it was bowed down to and accepted in where the cross was denied. 30 Chapter 2 teach, censor the press, put down uprisings, and detain or executed those caught in either royalist or republican schemes. He moreover made peace with the Catholic Church, marking a concordat with the Pope and dispensing with most of the badgering of the church and clergy that had been unleashed by the transformation. Maybe his most persevering bequest was the presentation of a new lawful code, the Napoleonic Code, which remains nowadays a premise of the legitimate frameworks of France and most of the rest of Europe, see Box 2.3. Napoleon shaped mass armed forces and driven them into other nations to spread the thoughts of transformation and to improve his possessed control and that of France. In 1805, he delivered a rebuffing vanquish on combined Austrian and Russian powers at Austerlitz in Austria. In another year, he smashed the Prussian armed force at Jena in Germany and possessed Berlin. At the Tallness Bonaparte crossing the Alps, 1801, by Jacques-Louis David. David was a supporter of the transformation, whose works of art contributed to the gallant picture of Napoleon, republished with authorization of the Musée National des Châteaux de Malmaison. The French insurgency in Napoleon 31 of the Napoleonic realm in 1810 to 1812. France controlled Spain, Italy, Belgium, Holland, Switzerland, and much of Germany, Poland, Croatia, and Slovenia. Napoleon was not a progressive, but he cemented numerous of the progressive changes of 1789 to 1791, and he himself bolstered most of the thoughts and proposition of Illumination philosophes. Through his military successes, he spread numerous of the thoughts of the edification and the insurgency over the landmass. In numerous of these zones, Napoleon set up ADJ republics total with constitutions, statements of rights, chosen councils, and gracious uniformity, and he executed money-related legal and regulatory changes modeled on those of French. In each portion of the domain, he undermined feudalism, presented a lawful code, cultivated ideas of agent government, and stirred the soul of patriotism. The people groups of these ranges did not precisely welcome French run the show per se, but they saw French advancements as instruments to be utilized against their possessed oppressive governments. The rulers, of course, saw Napoleon as a risk both to the ancient range and to the adjusted control in Europe. Box 2.3, the Napoleonic Code. Sometime recently, the transformation, regal law and church law both competed with local-level conventions in numerous French areas. Napoleon commissioned a battery of legal counselors to offer assistance, set up a uniform code of law, and actually played a hand in the venture. The code, over 2,000 articles in length, institutionalized numerous of the picks up of transformation, counting uniformity sometime recently the law, flexibility of religion, and the rights of property proprietors. It too reflected Napoleon's conventional sees of the family, which he considered a significant mediator between the state and the person. Napoleon once complained, "Women are considered as well exceedingly. They ought to not be respected as break even with to men. In reality, they are nothing more than machines for creating children." Too, the unused lawful code reflected this patriarchal see, with ladies and children legitimately subordinate to and subordinate on their spouses or fathers, and with men allotted control of family property. In any case, the code too required that legacies be partitioned among all children and girls, in this way finishing the home of primogeniture, which doled out all property to the eldest child. As an unforeseen result, French couples started to constrain themselves to 2 or 3 children, so their property would not be encouraged partitioned. The Napoleonic Code, connected or received all through much of Europe, is still the premise for the lawful frameworks of much of the landmass, counting common but Muslim, Turkey, as well as of the state of Louisiana, which was a French colony at the time of the Code's beginning. Napoleon himself felt that his code was his most persevering bequest. My eminence is not to have won 40 fights. What nothing will devastate, what will live unceasingly, is my respectful code. 332 Chapter 2 in the long run, in spite of the fact that Napoleon's broad military victories spread his control as well lean. In 1812, he amassed an armed force of 400,000 warriors and propelled an assault on Russia. Napoleon had changed the nature of fighting in Europe by recruiting tremendous armed forces and implanting them with a commitment to battle for France and for liberty, uniformity, and fraternity, the motto of the transformation. Nearly all over, the estimate and soul of these armed forces overcame the better trained, but hired soldier armed forces of European rulers, whose officers battled for a compensation or maybe than a cause. But the armed force of the Russian campaign overshadowed any past one, and its measure posture recalcitrant issues of supply, development, and coordinations. By the time Napoleon's armed force come to Moscow, the Russian winter had set in and the city was in blazes, likely set by the Russians themselves to deny the French a protect from the cold. In withdrawal, nearly the entire French armed force either forsaken or died from cold, starvation, and guerrilla assaults by the Russians. As it were, 70,000 made it back to France. By this time, Austria, Prussia, and Britain were associated with the Russians against Napoleon, whose military fortunes started to disappear. The partnered armed forces squeezed on, entered Paris, and constrained Napoleon to resign, sending him into Aus on the island of Elba off the Italian coast. He gotten away inside a year, energized bolster in France, and gone up against the united armed forces once more, as it were to be vanquished at long last by a British and Prussian armed force at the popular fight of Waterloo in Belgium in 1815. This time, he was expelled to a little island in the South Atlantic, St. Helena, where he kicked the bucket in 1821. Box 2 point for the War of 1812. The War of 1812 between the joined together states and Britain was a backhanded result of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. The joined together states had remained impartial in the struggle between Britain and France, but there was much sensitivity in the states for French progressive standards and waiting appreciation for France's bolster of the American insurgency an era prior. Preceding U.S. exchange of France amid the European wars incited the British to barricade U.S. ports, capture American vendor ships, and impress U.S. sailors suspected of being British miscreants. The joined together states pronounced war on Britain in 1812, in spite of the fact that this debate remained a sideshow for Britain, which was centered on vanquishing Napoleon. When this at last happened, the barricade finished, as did the driving force of the struggle with the joined together states, which was concluded in 1815. Numerous Americans celebrated this as the country's second war of independence, and the verses to the country's national song of devotion were composed by Francis Scott Key in 1814 after he seen the British maritime assault of Baltimore's Fort McHenry. Outline 2.1. Europe 1812-34 Chapter 2. With the vanquishing Napoleon, European rulers endeavored a reclamation of the ancient arrange in France. Louis XVIII, brother of Louis XVI, was put on the position of royalty, in this way re-establishing the Bourbon government. The boundaries of France were returned to those of 1790. Be that as it may, the progressive genie might not be put back into the bottle completely. Louis XVIII issued a protected constitution that joined numerous of the changes that had entered into French life and society since 1789, counting a degree of flexibility of discourse and parliamentary government. At the Congress of Vienna, 1814 to 1815, the four triumphant awesome powers, Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, affirmed the reclamation of the ancient arrange, with a few adjustments, and put the adjusted control with the aim of protecting monarchical control and keeping up enduring peace. And without a doubt, no continent-wide wars happened in Europe for the another 100 a long time. But the French insurgency and the Napoleonic Wars had unleashed strengths that would shake the establishments of European society. The to begin with advanced transformation happened in 1789, and the 1792 French Republic was a begin with advanced test with vote-based system in Europe. These occasions have motivated Democrats, liberals, communists, and progressives ever since. Napoleon spread thoughts of vote-based system, freedom, and balance, and planted the seeds of agent government all over Europe, whereas causing military devastation, and Bach's 2.5 Beethoven, and Napoleon the German composer Ludwig van Beethoven, 1770 to 1827, was moreover a revolutionary in the world of music. And like numerous progressives, he had separated sentiments approximately the French Transformation and Napoleon Bonaparte. Beethoven, himself a Republican, favoring agent government, appreciated Napoleon as an exemplification of the values of the French Transformation, and, in 1803, devoted his third orchestra to the common. But the another year, when Napoleon announced himself sovereign of France, Beethoven got to be baffled and tore up the page devoting the orchestra to Napoleon, renaming it essentially Eroica, the courageous ensemble. The way Beethoven composed music, and the music itself, was progressive and reflected the soul of the times. His forerunners, counting Franz Joseph Haydn and Mozart, had for the most part composed works commissioned by rulers or sovereigns, keeping the refined group of onlookers in intellect and performing in refined and exquisite courts. Beethoven, taken after his claimed person soul, composed with energy and rant that stunned his gatherings of people, and performed at open concerts that individuals paid to listen. He took music to the lanes. The Eroica Orchestra, like all of his major works, was a gigantic and long composition, full of pressure, feeling, catastrophe, and delight. It was progressive music, and Beethoven himself got to be an image of flexibility and independence. Outline 2.2. Europe 1815-36, Chapter 2, The Misfortune of Hundreds of Thousands of Human Lives. Indeed, Russia, which withstood the French assault in 1812, was influenced. Russian officers who sought after withdrawing French armed forces into France were uncovered to French civilization, illumination, considering, and progressive philosophy. Back in Russia, a few of them endeavored to build up a sacred government in Russia in the December's Revolt of 1825. This exertion was pulverized, but the Decembers were an afterward motivation for progressives who started the following extraordinary cutting-edge insurgency. In 1917, in Russia,